Yesterday, we all heard the news. Chile has elected a new president. I especially liked the Associated Press's headline. They wrote, "Leftist millennial wins election." So, Renee, who is this leftist millennial and what were the stakes in this election?
Yeah, Gabriel Boric actually emerged in the political scene about 10 years ago during the mass student mobilizations that surged again 2011, 2012. And these protests, this cycle of protests really changed politics in Chile in the during the neoliberal era. It had a transformative effect on the whole political scene. And one of the things that the student movement did was initiate, right, the emergence of what can be called a new radical left in Chile. And Gabriel Boric, who's 35-year-old president-elect, really was at the head of this emergence, and he has been shaping it and helping to guide it ever since. So that's kind of who Boric is and what he represents. What was at stake, to answer your second question very quickly, and then we can get into the details if time permits. But what was at stake, in my opinion, was really the question was whether or not Chile's political revolution that really exploded with the rebellion of 2019 and has since been driving an effort to refound the Chilean political system and part of the social arrangements as well. But what was at stake was whether or not the political revolution would continue, or whether or not it would end if his rival, José Antoni Kast, a hard right-wing candidate, won the elections. And Boric won resoundingly. So for now, it tells me that the political revolution is still alive. It's ongoing. There's a lot of excitement in Chile. You could see it. I was on the phone with my cousins all night. They were sending me videos. It was really palpable on the street. There was a sense that the movement to move Chile away from a neoliberal growth model, with just grotesque levels of inequality and exclusion that has characterized Chilean society over the last 30 years. There's a sense that we can keep this movement going. And, there's still work to be done to dismantle neoliberalism in Chile, but it can happen.
Right. Well, so speaking of the political revolution in Chile, one of the big pieces of context for this election is the Constitutional Convention and the election of a fairly left set of delegates to the convention. Could you maybe just refresh everyone's memory about what the convention is, who's a part of it, and what it looks like the outcome will be?
Yeah, it really is up in the air. But just to go back in time a bit, the Constituent Assembly, which is now in session and rewriting Chile's constitution, which is currently the constitution that was imposed after the transition from Pinochet's dictatorship. But how did we get here? It was really the result of the October 2019, what's called in Chile, el estallido social, or the big social kind of rebellion or explosion, which was characterized by just endless protests, very disruptive on the streets, in neighborhoods, in certain work sites, but mostly on the streets in the major cities throughout the country. That was happening at the end of second half of October. By middle of November, considering that the protests would just not subside, there was an agreement reached, and Gabriel Boric, president-elect, was actually an instrumental figure in reaching this settlement. So there was an agreement with the government that the way out of this crisis was to hold a referendum, ask Chileans through a plebiscite whether they wanted to rewrite the Constitution. And a year later, there was this plebiscite was held, and Chileans overwhelmingly voted to ditch the old Constitution and write the new one via a Constituent Assembly. So in, I believe, March of this year, there were elections, constituent elections, which had very promising results. The two dominant coalitions, the center-left and center-right coalitions that have governed Chile ever since the transition to democracy in 1990 were severely weakened, terminally so, in my opinion. And what you saw instead was the rise of this new left in two forms, I would say, in two guises. The new partisan left, which is centered around Gabriel Boric's alliance called the Frente Amplio, in coalition with the old Communist Party. But there was also a new radical autonomist left that did pretty well and had a significant presence. It has since imploded, this autonomous radical left, in ways that I think were damaging to the overall left and to the project, right? This kind of refoundational, transformative project right now. But at the very least, that strand of radical left politics has been weakened. And with this election result, I think one of the things we hope to see is that the radical new left in its partisan form and its coalition, Frente Amplio with the communists, can retake the initiative, pick up the work that had stalled in the assembly, and move forward from there. I think that's one of the major takeaways of last night's elections. This resounding win. Boric won with over 1 million vote over Kast. And considering how close the first round elections were, right, I don't think anyone expected Boric to do that well. That will allow the new left, this, in its partisan form, this coalition again of the Frente Amplio and the communists, to retake the political initiative, which it had lost ever since the assembly had been inaugurated. But I think we should be careful. It's only a partial recovery of this new left. While Boric has, his victory has given Chile's radical reformers, new life, and has allowed them to take the initiative. We have to keep in mind that he, as well as he did, he won with over 4.5 million votes, 4.6 million votes. And in October of 2020, in the plebiscite, in which Chileans were asked if they wanted a new constitution, almost 6 million voted in favor. So it's not a full recovery of this new left. And the other thing that I think is an important takeaway, and I know I'm moving away from your question, which was really about the assembly, but I think we should get it out of the way right now. Another really important thing that was established last night is the consolidation of this new right in Chile. Mm-hmm. Although José Antoni Kast, who represents this really harsh, anti-solidaristic, it's not economic populism that we've seen in other parts of the world. It's this harsh, authoritarian, illiberal, reactionary right? This strand of right-wing politics, I think, really consolidated itself. Again, he lost by 1 million votes, but he got more votes than the right wing, the center-right coalition, ever received in any of the elections under the democratic period since 1990. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot to celebrate, but at the same time, there is this worrisome development, and that's the consolidation of Kast's strand current of authoritarian right-wing politics.
I want to pick up on what you're saying about this kind of sort of tentative or, temporary left coalition. And I want to ask you about the class composition of that coalition, because you've written in the past about how the Chilean left, much like the left in many other parts of the world, including, of course, the US, has been sort of losing working class support over the last decades. Did the Boric campaign manage to reverse that trend in any way? Or what did that coalition look like?
Yeah, these elections, these campaigns, it's almost like a basketball game. They say basketball is a game of spurts. And there were all these reversals and turnarounds that happened pretty abruptly. And I think between the first round and last night, the results of the runoffs, I think Boric did manage to restore some of the backing, right, from more traditional working class voters. But the Frente Amplio in particular, right, because it emerged out of the student movement, it had most of its backing, I would say, enjoyed most of its backing came from highly educated middle layers, but who have been struggling over the last couple of decades, but they don't have strong ties, right, to the organized working class in labor, in industry. They parts of this new left tend to champion identitarian issues, other kind of typical social justice type concerns that you see among the radical left in the US. What I thought was promising about the new leftist coalition between the Frente Amplio and the Communist Party was that it portended the possibility of bringing together, right, this new vibrant left that is a lot younger, that is very urban, but with the old working class left, or what's left of it in organized form, that had closer ties to the Communist Party. Over the course of the first round campaigning, I think Boric's campaign tended to lose sight of and stray away from those broader class-wide material issues that could have, I think, helped bring these two sides of the new left closer together. And while he was able to motivate and inspire, this new young generation of social justice kind of radicals in Chile, his campaign tended to turn off, right, vast swaths of working Chileans who've really been struggling, not only under decades of neoliberalism in Chile, but especially in an intensified form since the pandemic hit Chile very hard over a year ago, as we know. So I think that accounts for his loss in the first round to Kast. It's not that Kast actually made significant inroads into the working class because they were so turned off by this new left that emphasizes cultural and identitarian social justice issues. It's not that, but he was able to peel away pivotal segments of working class votes, which gave him the edge in the first round. I think Boric and his team responded pretty well to this. And beginning in the second round, a couple of things happened as he started to campaign for the runoffs. One, yes, there was a moderation move to the center, that in Chile, that means what remains of the old center left. But at the same time, he began emphasizing some basic, broad, class-wide material grievances and reforms that his government will push in ways that he didn't in the first round. And so you look at the results, right? I'm still looking at all the numbers. One of the things that's most promising from the figures from last night are that people really came out in ways they hadn't in the first round in the poor urban centers throughout the country, mainly in the capital region, in the metropolitan region around Santiago, but in urban centers where Chile's working class is concentrated. And what you saw in some of the poorest districts are numbers that don't quite match up to the divide in the plebiscite of October of 2020, of last year, right? But they looked a lot more like those numbers than the first round. So you see, for instance, in the most populous townships in Santiago, Boric gets in some places 70-75% with, I should say, increased turnout. So that to me tells me that he did manage to connect with broad layers of the working class beyond just the kind of radical activists that emerged with the student movement and other movements that have risen since.
Mm-hmm. So maybe just actually one more question, and it's a little bit of a big question, so it'll be a big note to go out on. But as you very well know, obviously, I mean, just having a left or a socialist candidate obtain office is, insufficient for radically transforming society to the benefit of working people. It's probably necessary, but it's insufficient to, and that's where I think, the movements on the street, the protests have been pretty significant, I think, especially within Latin America as a whole, of what it portends for maybe the left in power actually being able to wield power and change society and not get like hamstrung by the interests of capital in the way that many other left governments have faced similar fates. But I am curious, given what the class composition is, both of the support for Boric, but also just for the left broadly, of like who the actual working class is in Chile. What kind of model can the incoming government actually implement to transform society, and by what means? Obviously, previous development models are no longer viable as far as how Chile developed previously and over the last like century or so. And this is going to have to be, in order to have like some kind of social democratic Chile, it's going to have to be something of a relationship, a partnership between Boric and working class movements and organized labor. And so I guess the question is really, it's both, how's it looking? Is it are the conditions ripe for Boric, and then what actually does it seem like Boric is going to be pursuing in office?
Oof. I mean, that's a huge question, and it is the central question at the moment. I should start by saying something that hasn't come up yet. I've neglected to mention that I did mention that with these results, this new hard right has consolidated itself in Chile. And one of the ways that's reflected, right, institutionally, is that the right has almost a majority, right, in the Senate. So it can block any of Boric's initiatives, right, and it will do so. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. So Boric is going to have to find other sources of power, other sources of capacity to push through any reform agenda, even a fairly watered down one, the fairly watered down one that he campaigned on in the second round for the runoffs. And that includes, however, significant reforms moving away from the neoliberal growth strategy or growth model, decommodification of basic social provision, such as healthcare, pensions for retirees, education, etc. As most folks know, what really sets Chile apart from most of the world is just how liberalized its economy became, and just how commodified all of these social goods have been over the last 50 years. And so even pushing through those reforms, right, which is a mild form of social democracy, if you will, is going to require, right, other sources of power right now in Chile. And half of that, a big chunk of that, right, will rely on, once again, remobilizing the sectors that came out in the rebellion in 2019. Youth, sectors with high unemployment rates, the informal sector who came out, in force back then, who were very disruptive, can be very disruptive. Young women's collectives, neighborhood associations, etc. But I don't think that will be enough. Those types of mobilization can be disruptive, right? But they lack a kind of power that those of you who have read my work know that I pay a lot of attention to,
Most of the audience has read your work, by the way. Just...
Okay.
They better have. If they haven't, they've been lying. And so,
well, of course, it's nothing that I've come up with, but it's something that I think all socialists should be aware of and know about. And I'm talking about, structural power, leverage that working people come from their position in the economy and at work and production. That kind of leverage will be absolutely vital for Boric to push through. Again, even this fairly watered down program that he will fight for as president. And when about 40% of the population is working in the informal sector, barely scraping by, right? That makes it tough to organize workers in formal industry, and particularly in the industries, right, where they can exert this kind of leverage, where they can flex their muscle and bring disruption and impose cost onto elites and society in general, right? But that is what it's going to take. And it's not altogether an impossible scenario. And this, goes back to one of Jen's questions, right? About the composition of the new left and how, what the connections are between this new partisan left and the organized working class. Leading up to the rebellion, October 2019, Chile had experienced the cycle of mobilizations, cycle of protests, which did include a lot of, you might call industrial actions, strike activity, workers organizing and stopping and going on strike, right, in strategic sectors of the economy. And in Chile, that mostly means, because it's, an economy that still depends on copper exports, that mostly means miners, and of course, the people who move mineral from the deposits, from the mines to ports, and from there ship them to, international markets. And we're talking about, transportation workers and dock workers. Mm-hmm. And those two sectors in particular had seen an upsurge in organizing, in strike activity during the teens and leading up to the rebellion. Now, that type of organizing and that type of wielding of structural capacity, if you will, has been waning, but the bases are there. And so it's going to be absolutely critical. Sorry about this. For Boric.
Is that Boric?
Yeah. He's disagreeing with everything I have to say.
Correcting the record live.
I get so mad at my students when this happens, so I hope they're not watching. But it's going to be absolutely critical for Boric to bring that alliance back together and lead in a way that actually makes that happen, right? And the Communist Party, that has more roots and has an organizing presence in some of these sectors, is going to be instrumental in pulling this off. In my view, however, it's the only chance that Boric has. As you said, Kale, right. There aren't any other sources of kind of social power that he can rely on. There are no segments of the elite that he can ally with, right, to push toward a post-neoliberal development strategy. So he's going to depend, again, exclusively on the mobilization of poor and working people. And within that, right, he's really going to need the structural muscle, the leverage of workers in strategic industries and strategic sectors. But there is hope there. There's promise, and it needs to be revived.
All right. Well, René, thank you so much for your latest update on really the state of Chilean neoliberalism. I'm sure we'll have you back on at some point in the future to continue the conversation. And everybody watching is, of course, already familiar with everything you've written for Catalyst and Jacobin, but just a reminder to go back and reread all of René's articles.
Especially this one, which just came out over the weekend. Tomorrow, the Chilean left has to do more than stop the far right. It came up before the election, but it speaks to a great deal of, the actual, everything we've been talking about now of like,
yeah. Well, that article should have come out 2 weeks prior.
Yeah.
that means that anything I write about these results will come out about 2 months from now. But hopefully
So stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.